Hi, I'm here with the Governor of Puerto Rico, Ricardo Rossello. Thank you so much for joining us, Governor.
Thank you, Leslie, and thanks everybody for the opportunity.
Absolutely. You have a big vote on Sunday for statehood, something that you've campaigned on and won election for governor on. How do you think statehood will help get Puerto Rico out of its fiscal and economic situation?
Well, statehood brings alongside with it, several things, right? Number one, and I think the most important one is equal political power to other states. I think that's critical. The second component, now just thinking about the economic development side of things, it brings with it stability. When we're looking around the world, markets that want to come to Puerto Rico and investment, they always talk about, the sort of instability of being a colonial territory. And lastly, of course, there are some resources on the fiscal side that would help, but by the same token, Puerto Ricans would be responsible for other components, just as regular U.S. citizens on other states. So it brings an opportunity, and with good governance, I think it'll aid not only in our fiscal problems. I think we can handle those, but certainly in the maximizing of opportunities that lay in Puerto Rico.
And you mentioned resources, and I think people on the mainland look at the potential for Puerto Rico being a state and saying, would this mean that we would have to take on the financial burden of an island that is going through bankruptcy proceedings? What do you say to those people?
Well, number one, the debt burden per capita in Puerto Rico is about a third of the debt burden per capita in the United States. Of course, the reason why we are in a fiscal crisis is because we are a territory. We don't print our own money, of course, and we don't have access to the markets. So what I would say is, we're on a path right now to fixing our problems. I've made sweeping reform changes in the past 5 months, labor reform, permits reform. We're about to have a tax reform as well. And we got a plan certified by the fiscal board as well that had significant downsizing of government. We feel that these reductions, if done properly, can lay the foundation for a path forward for Puerto Rico with great results for our people. So just to give you an example, our government has 131 agencies. There's no other state anywhere near that number. We've started the consolidation of those agencies, and we want to reduce it from 131 to about 35. That brings about, some significant reduction in operational costs, but also more efficiency, more effectiveness. People can point to where the services are given. So I think we can manage and we can work with it, and we wouldn't want a bailout. I'm no fan of bailouts. I think we need to assume responsibility for what's going on here. But certainly, as I said, statehood is much more than just resources. Statehood is an equal playing field for U.S. citizens that reside on the island. I mean, the particular thing about colonial territory is that if you are a U.S. citizen that was born in Nebraska or New York and moved to Puerto Rico, you lose those rights. Whereas if you were born in Puerto Rico and moved to any of those states, you gain them. So it's sort of a weird system. It's a relic of a past geopolitical system, and the world has drifted away from that. I think it's time for the U.S. to do the same and welcome the 3.5 million U.S. citizens that live in Puerto Rico as in equal footing.
And timing is an interesting thing because you look at what's going on in Washington, and they've taken down the Spanish language page of the White House website, and the Attorney General has supported efforts to make English the official language of the United States. And Donald Trump has tweeted about accusing the Democrats to bail out Puerto Rico with your tax dollars. That's the word he used. Mm-hmm. The people we spoke with on the ground here in Puerto Rico have felt neglected. Some of the people we've spoken with have felt neglected by Washington. What would you say to those people?
Well, it is a byproduct of being a colonial territory. We have no power. And of course, Washington works on the basis of priority and of the critical nature of trying to solve a problem. We, over here in Puerto Rico, we've been talking about the status issue for a while, but we need to make it a critical issue in the United States. And that sort of segues into, how is the current administration going to react to this? because people are skeptical if there is an opportunity or not. Well, I would say that when women, when the women's movement came about to get suffrage, there wasn't an environment for that either. They created the environment. Same with African Americans and so forth. We have to do the same, right? It doesn't matter who's in power. It doesn't matter what the context is. What matters is our request. What matters is being faithful to what I think are key principles of the United States: democracy, freedom, liberty, and those are inconsistent with a colonial territory in the 21st century. So even with the obstacles that might lay ahead, I would say that it is a very tough argument to neglect when you have 3.5 million U.S. citizens democratically choosing an option and just being neglected.
What's your relationship with the current administration? Have you met with Donald Trump? Do you know how he feels about the status of Puerto Rico?
So all I know, I've met him briefly on an activity for the National Governors Association. Never had a one-on-one meeting with him. I don't know how he feels about it. I can tell you what the Republican platform states about Puerto Rico, which is critical because now you have a Republican president, Republican-held Congress and Senate. And it states that they recognize the results of the 2012 plebiscites where the United States Puerto Rico rejected the colonial status and favored statehood, and they would push forward or promote a referendum or a plebiscite so that the people of Puerto Rico can choose between the options, and if they choose statehood, then they would abide by it. So it's part of his program. We'll see what opinion he has of that or what of the administration. It's certainly there, and my commitment is, once we have the vote, if the people of Puerto Rico again choose statehood, we will use our resources as a government to make sure that we transition out of the colonial territory and into a state.
Rafael Matos, a journalist, he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times recently about the situation in Puerto Rico, and he said that Puerto Ricans must unite to demand that Congress within a decade allow a binding referendum on the island's status. What do you make of that idea?
Well, I think I agree with it, except I would say it needs to be sooner than that. What we're seeing in Puerto Rico is a byproduct of two things. Number one, poor administration in the past. We've recognized that. We've talked. Evidence shows that as well, and we're tackling those issues. As I said, we're making structural reforms and so forth. But the other problem is the root problem, which is the colonial territory. So if we really want to engage and push forward, there needs to be attention paid to that side of things as well. So I would say there needs to be a binding plebiscite. I would invite Congress, if they don't respond to this one, to make their own. But we need to take action in Puerto Rico right now.
I want to turn now to the restructuring situation.
Of course.
After getting elected, you said publicly that you wanted to negotiate with the creditors outside of court, and of course on May 3rd that all changed with Title III being triggered. Would you be willing to take on additional negotiations outside of court at this time under Title VI? Voluntary talks with those bondholders?
We are with some of the credits. Here's the complexity of the situation, and it's a good opportunity to explain it. We came into office, and as soon as I swore in, I had 58 days to devise a fiscal plan for Puerto Rico. Not a lot of time. Not a lot of people thought we were going to be able to pull it out, but we did. After it was certified, by milestones placed by others. The stay on litigation that we had, which was a space so that we can renegotiate, expired about a month and a half after the plan was certified. So we really didn't have ample time for those renegotiation efforts to ensue. But we did have some successes. We have 17 different types of credits in Puerto Rico. We were able to renegotiate the GDB bonds in Puerto Rico. We were able to renegotiate, at least at principle, the PREPA bonds. But May 1st came along, And I was in the midst of discussions with some of the bondholders, and we started getting some lawsuits. Lawsuits which included, taking all of the money in our treasury to pay for the debt before it was used for essential services. So I couldn't allow the process to continue because it would be in the detriment of the people of Puerto Rico. So I immediately took action, May 2nd, called upon Title III, the protection of Title III, so that we could have the stay on litigation. Our view is that as if we can do it, if we can renegotiate, even under a Title III, you can renegotiate. Let's go for it. And some of the credits that were issued on a Title III were the CAFINA, GOs, some of the government bonds, and so forth. But there are still some outstanding credits that we are in negotiations and under Title VI negotiations, and hopefully they'll have good results.
Last week, you released that $9.6 billion spending plan.
Yes.
And it appeared to focus on covering pensions,
yes.
Which I know a lot of creditors looked at as prioritizing pensions over the bondholders. In Detroit and Stockton recent bankruptcies in the U.S., the same thing happened. Mm-hmm. Is that what will happen here as well? Is that how you see things?
Well, first of all, my job as governor is to make sure that the quality of life of the people in Puerto Rico gets better and to protect the most vulnerable. Certainly, those that receive pensions, in my view, are in a very vulnerable position. So there is a plan moving forward for progressive cuts to be made to the pensions. Those that earn above $2,000 a month in pensions, they will gradually receive pension, sort of pension reductions. Those that receive less will be protected. However, what we did here was a change from a pensions fund to a pay-go system. Reason being, when we arrived, we went to see the assets that we have, and we didn't have any assets. So it was a commitment to do a few things. Number one, to make sure it's not only a matter of cutting pensions or not, it was a matter of having the assets. There weren't any assets. If we continued through that same system, by October, we would have no money to pay the pension recipients. So we switched to a pay-go. What we did was we started making some significant reductions elsewhere in government. We reduced 47% in subsidies, incentives, and donations. We reduced about 10% of the operational costs in government. All in all, if you compare apples to apples, it would have been, if we compare a similar structure of the previous budget to ours, we're talking about a $1.5 billion reduction. So there is a significant pain, if you will, that has gone on the cutting side. But of course, we wanted to make sure that those pension recipients, notwithstanding that eventually those that receive higher pensions are gonna receive less, would be protected because they were completely exposed.
A lot of people see PREPA as the template for how much of the more than a dozen bonds that you're looking at would be restructured. Where do things stand now with that agreement?
So we reached a preliminary agreement because it was a pre-promesa deal and it had some liquidity considerations. It still had to go through the board. So similar to our RSA with the GDB bondholders, it's in the hands of the Fiscal Oversight Board, and they're going to determine if this restructuring, if you will, is consistent with the fiscal plan for PREPA, so that they can give it the green light or not. From our end, from the government's perspective, we've already reached the agreement, and we're just waiting to see what the Oversight Board says.
Is there any friction with the Oversight Board over these types of things?
Well, I must say, there is obviously in this new paradigm, naturally there is some friction. But I have to say that at least till this juncture, we have been able to work respectfully of one another. And my view is that I know what the role is. They should know what mine is. And the way I see it is they are here to make sure that fiscal objectives are met. and that we can eventually enter into the markets as well. Those are the two critical objectives. They're established by law. My role is to guide the policy in Puerto Rico and to, within the limitations, fiscal limitations, make the decisions that are better for the people of Puerto Rico.
2% of the population here has left in each of the last 3 years. That's equivalent to 18 million people leaving the United States, which I know our viewers could see as a big number. You know, how do you expect to grow this economy? How do you expect to grow top-line revenue when you're seeing such an exodus to the United States?
Well, again, number one, we need to understand why people are leaving. In the beginning of the, we've had sort of a lagging decade and a half. In the beginning of that process, the main reason people were leaving was because they didn't have opportunities. The fix would be simple. You just create more opportunities here in Puerto Rico. Unfortunately, it started changing to a quality of life component, right? Which means quality of health care, access to education, security, and so forth. Previous administrations have tried to work on this effort as sort of trying to see how we can get people back to the island. Our focus is let's first see how we can keep the people in the island, make their quality of life better, make sure they have opportunities to grow, and then setting the baseline so that other people can come over here. So we're tackling that head on, and again, it has to come in the short term. There's not a lot of things you can do except for showing the willingness to change and showing that there is an objective, a mid to long term objective of enhancing Puerto Rico and maximizing it. So I think we've been successful. Of course, these things have a lagging nature to them. So my view is that a lot of people, and recent polls in Puerto Rico came out that there was a significant reduction in the people that were considering leaving Puerto Rico, which a couple of years ago was essentially half of the population was thinking of leaving.
And a World Bank report showed that the U.S. ranks 8th in terms of ease of doing business, and Puerto Rico ranks 55th.
Right, and not only that, in certain areas, it used to rank in the bottom tier in bureaucracy, in permitting process, labor reforms or labor processes. So we've tackled those issues head on. This is what we're doing, right? We passed a labor reform law in the first month of my administration. We established a new permitting system where you can get automatic permits, so that number should significantly change next time those rankings come along. So we're very cognizant of that, and we wanted to make sure that we can get up to par with the United States and be in the vanguard.
Governor, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much, Leslie. A pleasure.
For CNBC Business News, this is Leslie Picker.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.